A man who knows his own worth never needs to raise his voice, because the truth has a way of speaking when everyone else finally falls silent. The ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every polished glass reflecting the confidence of people accustomed to power, influence, and applause. Conversations drifted through the air alongside the soft notes of a string quartet while cameras flashed across the marble floor, capturing every famous smile and carefully rehearsed handshake. At the center of it all stood Ethan Brooks, one of America's youngest self-made billionaires, wearing a simple navy suit that looked almost understated compared to the designer tuxedos surrounding him. Beside him stood his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, wearing a pale blue dress and white flats, her small hand wrapped securely around her father's fingers as if that simple connection mattered more than every fortune gathered inside the room. Ethan had been invited to announce the largest charitable partnership of the year, one expected to provide scholarships, children's hospitals, and family housing across several states. Instead, whispers had begun long before he stepped onto the stage. Some questioned whether his generosity was genuine. Others quietly suggested every donation carried a hidden business advantage. The loudest voice belonged to Richard Kane, a respected board member whose polished smile concealed years of envy. He adjusted his cufflinks before speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Amazing how philanthropy becomes fashionable when cameras are watching. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Someone lifted a champagne glass. Someone else avoided looking directly at Ethan. Claire Whitmore, president of the foundation, remained silent several feet away. She had admired Ethan's achievements from a distance, yet tonight uncertainty clouded her judgment. Every report Richard had shown her suggested Ethan's latest investment might somehow benefit from the foundation's partnership. She wanted to believe there was another explanation, but doubt can grow quickly when dressed as evidence. Ethan looked toward Richard without anger. His expression never changed. He simply glanced down at Lily, whose bright green eyes searched his face with quiet trust. Then he removed the foundation name badge clipped to his jacket. The tiny metallic sound echoed far louder than anyone expected. He placed it carefully onto the podium instead of dropping it. "If my presence causes people to question the mission," he said calmly, "then I'll walk away." Silence settled over the ballroom. Reporters lowered their cameras. Board members exchanged confused looks. Richard folded his arms, believing victory had arrived without resistance. Claire felt an unexpected weight settle in her chest. She had prepared herself for an argument, a legal threat, perhaps even public outrage. She had not prepared for dignity. Ethan reached for Lily's hand again and turned toward the grand exit beneath the towering columns. Their footsteps crossed the polished marble floor with quiet rhythm, never hurried, never bitter. The orchestra had stopped playing. Even the servers stood motionless beside silver trays. Every eye followed the father and daughter walking toward the doors as though leaving behind far more than a business partnership. Just before they reached the entrance, Lily gently released her father's hand. Ethan paused, surprised. The little girl looked back at the hundreds of silent faces filling the ballroom. She hugged something tightly against her chest that no one had noticed before, a folded drawing covered with bright crayon colors. Without fear, without hesitation, and with the innocent honesty only a child possesses, she took one small step away from her father and quietly said, "Daddy. I think they forgot why you started helping people in the first place." 6 months earlier, before whispers replaced admiration and before a crowded ballroom questioned his character, Ethan Brooks woke every morning at 5:30 without an alarm. The mansion overlooking Lake Evergreen was impressive from the outside, with tall windows, manicured gardens, and stone walkways stretching nearly a quarter mile across the property, yet the rooms often felt quieter than any small farmhouse. Wealth had filled every corner with comfort, but it had never managed to replace the laughter that disappeared the day his wife passed away. Every morning began exactly the same. Ethan prepared blueberry pancakes while Lily carefully packed her own lunch, insisting that she was old enough to spread peanut butter without making a mess, even though a little always ended up on the counter. They laughed about it anyway. Before leaving for school, Lily would always place a framed photograph of her mother back into its perfect position beside the kitchen window after gently wiping away fingerprints with a soft towel. It had become her own little tradition. Ethan never reminded her. She simply did it because love often lives inside the smallest habits. The drive to Brookside Elementary lasted almost 20 minutes. They never rushed. Some mornings they stopped for hot chocolate. Other mornings they watched ducks gathering near the edge of the lake before the first school bell rang. To the parents standing outside the school entrance, Ethan looked like any devoted father wearing jeans, a light jacket, and comfortable sneakers. Very few recognized him as the founder of one of the largest technology companies in the country because he preferred ordinary moments over public attention. After dropping Lily off, Ethan rarely drove directly to corporate headquarters. Instead, he visited neighborhoods where his charitable foundation quietly funded food programs, housing renovations, and after-school tutoring. He never invited photographers. He never announced his schedule. If someone thanked him, he usually smiled and answered, "The people who deserve credit are the ones doing the work every day." Those words became familiar to teachers, volunteers, and community leaders who saw him appear without warning carrying boxes, stacking chairs, serving meals, or listening far longer than he spoke. His assistants often complained that he spent too much time outside executive meetings, but Ethan believed every balance sheet looked different after spending an afternoon with families struggling to pay rent or children dreaming about college. Money, he often told his leadership team, should solve problems before it celebrates success. One rainy Thursday afternoon, while helping organize donated books inside a neighborhood learning center, Ethan noticed Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor reading aloud to 3 younger children who had barely learned to sound out simple words. She read slowly, changing her voice for every character until the room filled with giggles. When she finished, one little boy hugged the book against his chest and whispered, "Can I take this home?" Lily looked toward her father. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Books are meant to travel," he said warmly. "Stories become stronger every time someone shares them." Lily smiled the same gentle smile her mother once carried. On the drive home she asked a question that lingered in Ethan's heart for weeks. "Daddy, if people have so much money, why do some children still worry about little things?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes people notice numbers before they notice neighbors." Lily quietly stared out the passenger window as sunlight broke through the retreating clouds. Then she whispered something so softly Ethan almost missed it. "When I grow up, I want people to remember how they felt after meeting me, not how much I had." Ethan smiled without saying another word, because in that single sentence he realized the greatest inheritance he could ever leave his daughter would never appear on any financial statement. The following Monday, Ethan Brooks received an invitation to meet with the Whitmore Foundation, an organization respected across the country for transforming charitable donations into lasting community programs. The invitation came directly from Claire Whitmore herself, whose family had spent generations building hospitals, libraries, and scholarship funds that quietly changed thousands of lives. Ethan accepted without hesitation, not because of the publicity the partnership could generate, but because he believed their shared purpose could reach children who had been overlooked for far too long. The foundation headquarters overlooked downtown Chicago from the top floor of a restored limestone building where history and modern design blended together with remarkable elegance. Sunlight poured through towering windows, illuminating polished oak tables, carefully framed photographs of community projects, and shelves lined with handwritten letters from families whose lives had been changed through simple acts of generosity. Claire stood near the conference room windows reviewing financial reports before Ethan arrived. She had built a reputation for thoughtful leadership, careful judgment, and unwavering integrity. Since losing her husband several years earlier, she had devoted nearly every waking hour to expanding the foundation's work, convincing herself that purpose could quiet loneliness. Yet success had also taught her caution. She had witnessed generous promises collapse beneath hidden agendas, and she no longer accepted appearances without evidence. When Ethan entered the room, he greeted every employee before taking his seat. He thanked the receptionist for recommending a neighborhood bakery on his last visit and complimented a maintenance worker arranging fresh flowers in the hallway. None of those gestures appeared rehearsed. They simply reflected who he was. Claire noticed them, although she said nothing. Their meeting began with optimism as architects displayed plans for family resource centers, educational grants, and affordable housing initiatives. Ethan listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking how each project would affect parents raising children alone. Every question centered on people rather than recognition. Claire found herself quietly impressed by his attention to details that most executives ignored. Then the conference room doors opened once more. Richard Kane entered carrying a leather portfolio and the confidence of a man who expected every conversation to move according to his design. His smile appeared friendly, yet his eyes measured every reaction around the table. After greeting everyone warmly, he placed several neatly organized documents before Claire. "Before we finalize anything," he said smoothly, "there are a few concerns the board deserves to review." The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Richard presented charts highlighting future commercial developments located near neighborhoods scheduled to receive foundation investments. He implied that Ethan's technology company could indirectly benefit as property values increased, carefully avoiding direct accusations while allowing suspicion to fill every silence between his sentences. Every page looked convincing. Every statistic appeared carefully researched. Claire slowly turned each document while her confidence began to waver. Ethan studied the reports without interruption. He recognized several numbers taken completely out of context, yet he also understood how persuasive incomplete truths could become when arranged with precision. Richard leaned back comfortably and folded his hands. "I am sure none of this is intentional," he said with practiced courtesy. "But perception matters just as much as reality when public trust is involved." Several board members nodded. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Claire looked toward Ethan, hoping he would immediately dismantle every allegation with facts and legal documents. Instead, he quietly closed the folder and rested his hands on the polished table. His voice remained calm. "If protecting the foundation's reputation requires difficult questions, then you should ask every one of them." Richard smiled almost imperceptibly. Claire could not explain why Ethan's peaceful response unsettled her more than an angry denial would have. As the meeting ended, she watched him leave through the long hallway without looking back. For reasons she could not yet understand, the quiet confidence of that solitary walk lingered in her thoughts long after every spreadsheet had been put away. Over the next several weeks, the questions did not disappear. They multiplied quietly, spreading through board meetings, private emails, and carefully worded conversations that always seemed to end the moment Ethan Brooks entered the room. No one openly accused him of dishonesty, yet every new discussion carried the same invisible weight. Doubt had found a comfortable place to live. Richard Kane understood exactly how suspicion worked. It did not need to shout. It only needed enough room to grow. Each morning he delivered another report. Another projection, another collection of charts suggesting that the foundation's future projects might accidentally increase the value of nearby technology investments connected to Ethan's company. Every document appeared reasonable on its own. Together they painted a picture that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. Claire Whitmore spent long evenings reviewing every page inside her quiet office. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows while the city lights shimmered across the river below. She highlighted paragraphs, checked financial records, and compared timelines until midnight more than once. Still, something refused to settle inside her heart. The numbers seemed convincing, yet they somehow failed to match the man she had watched thank receptionists, carry donation boxes, and speak more passionately about children than profits. She wanted certainty, but certainty remained frustratingly out of reach. Ethan, meanwhile, never called reporters. He never hired public relations experts to defend his reputation. His executive team urged him to issue statements, organize interviews, and challenge every allegation immediately. One advisor placed several prepared speeches across Ethan's desk. "If you stay silent," she warned gently, "people will assume the worst." Ethan slowly closed the folder without reading a single page. "Truth does not become stronger because it speaks first," he answered quietly. "Sometimes it simply arrives last." His words left the room as calm as they entered it. Even those who disagreed with him could not argue against the peace in his voice. Days later, the Whitmore Foundation scheduled its final board vote before approving the largest charitable partnership in its history. Directors from across the country filled the conference room, their conversations unusually restrained. Coffee cups cooled untouched. Pens rested beside unopened notebooks. Outside, gray clouds drifted slowly across the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows over the glass towers below. Claire called the meeting to order with steady hands, although her heartbeat felt anything but steady. Richard stood first. His presentation was polished, confident, and measured. He never once claimed Ethan had committed wrongdoing. Instead, he repeated the phrase public confidence so many times that it became impossible to separate perception from reality. One board member asked whether postponing the partnership might protect the foundation from future criticism. Another quietly agreed. The room gradually leaned toward caution instead of trust. Finally, Claire looked across the long oak table. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "before the board votes, would you like to respond?" Every face turned toward him. The silence became almost tangible, interrupted only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Ethan rose slowly from his chair. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes without resentment or disappointment. Then he folded his hands in front of him. "I could spend the next hour defending my name," he said. "I could explain every investment, every decision, every rumor that has found its way into this room. But if trust has already been replaced by suspicion, then no presentation will restore what has been lost today." No one interrupted. Even Richard remained perfectly still. Ethan offered Claire a small, respectful smile filled not with defeat but with grace. "If my staying creates even the smallest shadow over the mission you have devoted your life to protecting, then I will remove myself from the partnership. The children this foundation serves deserve confidence, not controversy." Claire felt her throat tighten as the words settled over the room like gentle snowfall. There was no anger. No accusation. No attempt to win. Only a man quietly choosing principle over pride, unaware that the greatest test of his character had not yet begun. The board meeting ended without celebration. Chairs slid quietly across the hardwood floor as directors gathered their folders, avoiding one another's eyes as though every step carried the weight of an unfinished conversation. Outside the conference room, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished hallway, turning the marble beneath Ethan Brooks's shoes into ribbons of gold. He did not linger to shake hands or defend himself one last time. He simply thanked the administrative assistant who had prepared coffee for everyone, wished the security guard a peaceful evening, and walked toward the elevator where Lily had been waiting with a book resting on her lap. The moment she saw her father, she smiled the same gentle smile that had brightened every difficult day since they had learned to face life together. She slipped her small hand into his without asking a single question. Somehow she always sensed when silence was kinder than curiosity. As the elevator descended floor by floor, neither of them spoke. The soft hum of the cables echoed through the polished cabin while downtown Chicago slowly rose into view beyond the glass wall. Ethan stared toward the skyline without really seeing it. He was not thinking about headlines, financial losses, or damaged reputation. He was thinking about the children whose scholarships might never exist if the foundation became divided because of him. Sometimes walking away protected something greater than winning. The elevator doors opened into the spacious lobby where visitors continued arriving for the evening charity gala. Elegant dresses swept across the stone floor. Business leaders exchanged warm greetings. Reporters adjusted camera lenses beneath enormous floral arrangements, filling the entrance with the scent of fresh lilies and white roses. A few guests recognized Ethan and whispered quietly to one another. Lily's footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor as the revolving doors turned behind her, carrying a cool breeze into the grand lobby before settling once again into perfect stillness. Guests paused in the middle of conversations, puzzled by the sight of a little girl walking alone through a room filled with executives, philanthropists, and television cameras. She held a folded drawing carefully against her chest with both hands as though it were the most valuable thing she owned. Ethan watched from outside but did not call her back. He trusted his daughter enough to know that kindness guided every decision she made. Claire Whitmore noticed Lily first. She stepped forward instinctively, kneeling until they were nearly eye level. "Sweetheart," she asked. Gently, "is everything all right?" Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Daddy forgot something." Claire smiled politely. "What did he forget?" Lily looked around the enormous ballroom where crystal lights sparkled above perfectly dressed strangers. Then she answered with complete sincerity. "He forgot to tell everybody why he started helping people." The quiet words drifted farther than anyone expected. Nearby conversations faded. Even the musicians lowered their instruments without realizing it. Richard Kane remained near the stage with folded arms, waiting for someone to escort the child outside before the evening ceremony officially began. Instead, every eye slowly turned toward Lily. She unfolded the piece of paper she had been protecting all afternoon. It was not a financial report. It was not an award. It was a simple crayon drawing made years earlier by a child. Across the top, written in uneven letters, were the words, "My daddy fixes hearts even when they are invisible." Claire looked at the picture more closely. It showed a father holding the hand of a little girl beneath a bright yellow sun while several other families stood smiling around them. The drawing had faded with time, but every color still carried warmth. Lily took a slow breath before speaking again. "I made this when I was 6 because I thought Daddy was a doctor." A few gentle smiles appeared throughout the room. Lily shook her head. "But Mommy told me he fixed hearts in a different way." Her voice remained soft, yet every sentence seemed to fill the ballroom more completely than the expensive sound system ever could. "After Mommy went to heaven, Daddy cried when he thought I was asleep. Then every Saturday he started taking me places where people were lonely. He said if our hearts hurt, maybe somebody else's hurt even more." Claire felt her own breathing slow as she listened. Lily continued without hesitation. "Sometimes Daddy bought groceries for families, but he told me never to tell anyone because if people thanked him too much, they might feel embarrassed instead of loved. Sometimes he paid for medicine, and sometimes he helped children go to school. One Christmas he told me that the best gifts are the ones nobody knows who gave them." A deep silence settled across the ballroom. Reporters who had arrived hoping for controversy slowly lowered their cameras. Several board members looked down at the polished floor. One elderly trustee quietly removed his glasses and wiped away moisture gathering in his eyes. Lily looked toward Claire with complete innocence. "Daddy says money is only useful after it becomes kindness. If people think he came here because he wanted something, then they never got to meet the daddy that I know." No applause followed. No one moved. The silence itself became the loudest response in the room. Claire looked toward the grand entrance where Ethan still stood outside beneath the evening sky, waiting patiently without demanding to be heard, and for the first time since this story had begun, she realized that the quiet man walking away had never been protecting his reputation at all. He had been protecting everyone else's chance to believe that goodness could still exist. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The ballroom that had moments earlier been filled with polite conversations and confident opinions now stood wrapped in a silence so complete that even the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock near the entrance seemed unusually loud. Claire Whitmore slowly rose to her feet, her eyes never leaving the small drawing in Lily's hands. Something deep inside her refused to accept that an innocent child could have invented such a story. She looked toward the Foundation Archives manager standing quietly near the back of the room. "Margaret," she said gently, "would you bring me the confidential donor records from the legacy office?" The older woman hesitated only briefly before nodding. Within minutes she returned carrying several thick binders and a secure tablet containing donation histories that only a handful of trustees had permission to review. Claire opened the records with careful hands. The first page listed anonymous contributions made nearly 7 years earlier. The second page revealed scholarship funds established under a private designation. The third showed emergency medical grants delivered through local hospitals without public acknowledgement. As she continued turning pages, a pattern slowly emerged. Every anonymous gift, every emergency fund, every housing project, every educational program that had quietly rescued struggling families traced back to the same hidden source. Ethan Brooks had deliberately removed his own name from thousands of charitable records. There were no press releases, no photographs, no public recognition. Only quiet generosity stretching across years. Claire felt her heart sink beneath the weight of what she had failed to see. Around the ballroom, several trustees gathered behind her, studying the documents in stunned disbelief. One elderly board member whispered, "He never wanted anyone to know." Another slowly removed his reading glasses and shook his head. "We questioned the very man who kept asking us to protect people's dignity." Richard Kane stepped forward with a composed smile that suddenly looked far less convincing than before. "Anonymous donations prove generosity," he said carefully. "They do not eliminate potential conflicts of interest." Before anyone could respond, another voice interrupted from the entrance. "Perhaps these will help." Every head turned toward the doorway. A middle-aged elementary school principal entered carrying a weathered envelope. Beside her stood a children's hospital director, a neighborhood pastor, and a retired firefighter. None of them had planned to attend the gala together. They simply recognized Ethan's name on the invitation list and had come hoping to thank him privately after the ceremony. The principal unfolded several handwritten letters from former students who had become teachers, engineers, nurses, and military officers because someone had quietly paid their tuition years earlier. The hospital director explained how an anonymous donor had prevented the pediatric cancer wing from closing during a financial crisis. The pastor described hundreds of grocery deliveries that had appeared every Thanksgiving without a single camera present. The retired firefighter smiled warmly before saying, "I spent 3 years trying to discover who kept repairing homes after house fires. I finally learned. It was Mr. Brooks only because he accidentally left behind a work glove with his initials inside." Soft murmurs spread across the ballroom. Claire returned to the financial reports Richard had presented weeks before. This time she noticed something she had missed. Several pages selectively omitted surrounding property records, making unrelated investments appear connected. She compared dates, addresses, and legal filings. The more carefully she examined the documents, the clearer the omissions became. Richard shifted uncomfortably as questions began coming from every direction. "Why were these pages incomplete?" one trustee asked. "Why were the supporting reports excluded?" asked another. Richard opened his portfolio, searching for explanations that suddenly seemed impossible to organize. Claire quietly closed every folder before looking toward the grand entrance where Ethan still waited outside beneath the fading evening sky, unaware that the truth had finally begun speaking for itself, and inside the ballroom every certainty built upon suspicion was slowly giving way to something far stronger than accusation, respect earned without ever asking for it. Claire Whitmore closed the final binder with trembling hands, and the gentle sound of its cover meeting the polished table echoed through the ballroom like the end of a long misunderstanding. She looked around at the trustees, the community leaders, the reporters, and the guests who only an hour earlier had quietly accepted suspicion as though it were truth. Now every familiar face carried the same expression. Regret. Richard Kane attempted one final explanation, insisting that the missing documents had been an administrative oversight, but no one interrupted Claire as she slowly stood and gathered the anonymous donation records against her chest. She walked through the silent crowd without hurry, her heels clicking softly across the marble floor while every person instinctively stepped aside. The grand entrance remained open to the cool evening air where Ethan Brooks still stood beside the waiting car, one hand resting lightly on the roof while he patiently watched Lily through the glass doors. He had not tried to return. He had not called attorneys. He had not demanded an apology. He simply waited for his daughter because that had always mattered more than defending his pride. Claire stopped a few feet in front of him. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected across the glass behind them while a gentle breeze stirred the flowering trees lining the entrance plaza. Finally, Claire lowered her eyes. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "I believed papers more quickly than I believed character. I saw numbers before I saw the man standing in front of me. I was wrong." Ethan remained silent. His expression held neither satisfaction nor disappointment. It carried only the calm patience that had guided him through every misunderstanding. Claire continued, her voice growing softer. "You protected this foundation even after we failed to protect your name. I do not know how to repay that." Ethan looked toward the ballroom where dozens of families, volunteers, and board members were now gathering near the entrance. "You already can," he answered gently. "Do not let this become a story about me. Let it become a reminder that trust deserves as much investigation as doubt." Claire felt tears gather in her eyes. She nodded slowly before turning toward the waiting audience. Without using the microphone, she spoke clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Tonight, we nearly lost something far more valuable than a partnership. We nearly lost the ability to recognize quiet goodness because it did not ask for attention." One by one, the trustees stepped outside. The elementary school principal approached Ethan and thanked him for believing in children nobody else noticed. The hospital director shook his hand with both of his own. Volunteers, teachers, pastors, firefighters, and scholarship recipients quietly formed a line, each carrying a memory of kindness that had never appeared in a newspaper. Then something remarkable happened. No one announced it. No one instructed the crowd. An elderly trustee slowly began clapping. Another joined him. Then another. Within seconds the applause spread across the entrance plaza and into the ballroom until hundreds of hands echoed beneath the evening sky. It was not loud because people were excited. It was powerful because people finally understood. Ethan looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. He gave a small nod of gratitude before kneeling beside Lily. "You should not have carried all of that by yourself," he whispered with a warm smile. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. "I did not," she answered softly. "Mom helped me remember." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, holding his daughter a little closer while the applause continued around them. Above the entrance, the first evening stars appeared over the Chicago skyline, and for everyone standing there, it became unmistakably clear that the greatest victories are rarely won by the loudest voices. They belong to the people whose quiet dignity inspires everyone else to become better. 3 months passed, and spring slowly painted new shades of green across the parks, neighborhoods, and quiet streets that had become the heart of the Whitmore Foundation's renewed mission. The partnership had been restored, but not in the way anyone originally imagined. Ethan Brooks accepted only one condition. His name would never appear on the buildings, scholarship programs, or community centers funded through his contributions. Every plaque carried the same simple inscription instead, built through shared kindness. When reporters asked why the country's most recognizable billionaire refused public recognition, he always answered with the same gentle smile. The families walking through those doors should remember hope, not the person who helped pay for the walls. Eventually, the questions stopped because people realized he truly meant every word. Claire Whitmore changed as well. She no longer approved projects from behind conference room tables alone. Every Friday morning she visited schools, shelters, and neighborhood centers alongside volunteers, listening before making decisions. She often found herself remembering Ethan's quiet advice that trust deserved as much attention as doubt. It became the guiding principle of the entire foundation. New board members received that sentence during orientation before reviewing a single financial report. Richard Kane quietly resigned several weeks after the gala. There were no dramatic headlines and no public humiliation. His departure became little more than a brief announcement followed by silence. Claire believed that restoring integrity mattered far more than prolonging embarrassment. She chose to rebuild instead of retaliate, and the foundation grew stronger because of it. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Ethan and Lily visited the same neighborhood learning center where she had once read stories to younger children. The building looked different now. Fresh paint brightened the classrooms. New books filled the shelves. Laughter drifted through the open windows while children raced across the playground beneath clear blue skies. Lily, now a little taller, carried another stack of picture books beneath her arm. She smiled as several children hurried toward her, asking if she would read to them again. Ethan watched from a nearby bench beneath an old maple tree. Claire approached carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to Ethan before sitting beside him. For a while neither of them spoke. They simply listened to children laughing in the distance while birds settled gently among the branches overhead. Finally Claire broke the comfortable silence. "You know," she said quietly, "I spent years believing wisdom came from experience." Then an 8-year-old girl taught an entire ballroom what character really looks like. Ethan looked toward Lily, who had already disappeared into another animated story surrounded by smiling children. His eyes reflected both gratitude and quiet pride. "Children notice what adults forget," he answered softly. "They still believe people should be measured by how they love others." Claire smiled. "She reminds me that goodness does not need a microphone." Ethan nodded. It never did. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, Lily ran toward them holding another drawing. This one showed a large tree with people from every walk of life standing together beneath its branches. At the top she had written in colorful letters, "Kindness grows bigger when everyone shares it." Ethan laughed gently before placing the drawing beside the first one that he still kept folded inside his jacket. Some treasures belonged in museums. Others belonged close to the heart. Years later, many people would remember the scholarships, the homes, the hospitals, and the lives transformed through quiet generosity. But those who had stood inside that ballroom would remember something even greater. They would remember the day a little girl's honest words reminded an entire room that dignity never needs to compete with pride, truth never needs to rush ahead of lies, and the strongest legacy any parent can leave behind is not measured by wealth, but by the goodness a child carries into the world.